Hi, I'm Tracy.
And I'm Sharon, and we are Feet of Clay, Confessions of the Cult Sisters. So way back in the 1970s, we became radical Christians in the Jesus movement.
We were promoted to leadership in the crazy cult commune Last Days Ministries, founded by none other than Christian music megastar Keith Green.
Now we're sharing our decades-long escape from the trauma and abuse of extreme Christianity.
We tell our own stories and also invite guests to talk about fundamentalism, purity culture, arranged marriages, child abuse, misogyny, homophobia, power-hungry patriarchy, and much more.
Much, much more. So join us as we share our journey of healing and humor and how we finally found peace and joy on the other side.
Feet of Clay, Confessions of the Cult Sisters, wherever you get your podcasts.
Episode 110, Guns. Before I introduce this episode, we have just made our YouTube channel live. See show notes for a link. Or search for Reason Press on YouTube. Do subscribe if you prefer to consume our content there. On that subject, please do take a few moments to review Still Unbelievable in your podcasting app to improve our reach. Reviews are essential for podcasts like this. Also, if you are a podcaster or other content creator and want to participate in advert swapping, please get in touch at reasonpress@gmail.com. This is Matthew, and in this episode of Still Unbelievable, Andrew and I welcome listener James for a conversation on guns. As an outsider to American culture and an opponent of gun rights, I find this discussion helpful in understanding why some take a different view. Ultimately, I don't think any minds were changed in this conversation, but it did help foster better understanding, and that's something we should celebrate. So thank you, James, for contacting us and for the conversation. James does mention his own imminent podcast during this show. At time of going live, I didn't have any details to publish, but as soon as I have those, I will make them known. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Still Unbelievable. Right, we've bashed religion to death for the last couple of months, so we're going to take a little bit of a break from that. Andrew and I are here sitting in the corner again, and we have a guest. But before we get to our guest, I had a nightmare before coming on, Andrew. I had the usual make sure my machine's freshly rebooted and everything, and my microphone wouldn't work, and recycles and plugging and unplugging of USB ports. I tell you, how many years has Microsoft been doing Windows, and how long has it taken them not to sort this out? So I tell you, if I had a gun, there'd be a few more air venting holes in the side of this PC. I can tell you that one for sure. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I only have 3 words for all of that. Buy a Mac. Okay.
Sorry, something went weird in my body just then. I can't explain it.
Understood all the words, but not in that order. I
Yes.
totally get it. I was actually really impressed by how you said you were able to resolve the problem, because I have not had success either the way you said you have.
Yeah, normally unplugging all my USB devices, doing a power cycle on the PC, plug them all back in again is the way to solve it. But I actually had to do fix and repair. I have never used that successfully in however many years I've tried, and it worked first time tonight. It was just awesome. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing.
Yeah. I usually end up somewhere in H key local machine, yada yada yada, right? And
Yeah.
And that's
if you're
fine.
going there, you've really fucked things up. I can tell you that.
Well, I sort of think I fucked it up when I power up a Windows box. But, look,
wrong show.
But I was impressed that it worked this time. Is that a Win 11 box?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The one with all the toolbar icons in the wrong place. That version of Windows.
Yeah. Buy a Mac.
Right, let's introduce our guest. Our guest is a listener. We put out a call on several episodes ago. It must be almost 10 episodes ago now. Or was it 20? Anyway, some time ago, we put out a call. Does someone want to talk to us about guns? And we got a bite. Can you believe it? So James or Jim, are you a short name person or not? Because I never accept being called Matt, although lots of people seem to call me Matt.
You can call me anything you want.
So long as I call you. Okay. Well, welcome to Still Unbelievable, James. You responded to our call out about guns. Why would you want to talk to us about guns?
Well, thanks, Matthew and Andrew. Love your guys' podcast. It's really helped me on my journey with deconstruction. So you had back on episode 94, you said you wanted somebody from the U.S. who, quote, knew something about the relationship to gun control to contact you. So thought it'd be a great idea to reach out and just say, hey, I'm no expert on this. I've had a little bit of training. I do care about it and can share what I know. And so that's that. A little bit about me. I'm married 24 years to the most beautiful woman in the world, who's also a professional brewer. I'm a software engineer, licensed amateur radio operator. I live in the state of Pennsylvania here in the U.S. I lawfully carry a firearm in public for protection of my family and believe that the right to keep and bear arms is an inalienable right guaranteed by our constitutions. I'm also a budding podcaster. I was given permission by Matthew to plug my future podcast called Preparing For It Life. My friend Sean and I are trying to build community to encourage people to live intentionally. So whatever we're going to discuss here is, like I said, my belief, and I'm open to change. I love the street epistemology method style of discussion, and so I look forward to being respectfully challenged.
I am scared to death of what you just said. And the reason is that we both like street epistemology too, and so I'm afraid that this is going to result in something like the Socratic method, where nothing that we do is anything more than ask each other questions. And there's like 0 answers in the podcast because we're all practicing that sort of approach. Man, thank you for listening to Still Unbelievable, and when you get your show up and running, let's swap commercial.
Yeah.
Because after the first month, when you have more listeners than we do, we will want to use your platform to scarf some of your listeners. So that's how that is. But thanks for coming. Really, thank you for being on Still Unbelievable.
So I guess for me then, as an outsider to the US, so just in case nobody has realised or nobody knows or nobody's been listening for long enough, I live in the UK. We are a gun-free country. I am not free to carry a gun legally or otherwise. Well, I'm technically free if I could find one. Finding a gun, for starters, would be really difficult. There isn't a shop where I can go and buy a gun. For me to get hold of a gun would be extremely difficult. There's a licensing process that I would need to go through, and there are all sorts of regulations that I would have to go through. There'd be all sorts of police checks I would have to go through. And the limited knowledge I have about gun ownership in the UK is any gun that I have would have to be licensed for a specific purpose and would have to be locked away in a locked cabinet, separate from the ammunition, if I was to keep it at home. So the idea of me as an individual carrying a gun in public is just not possible. It couldn't happen. And to be bluntly honest, I like it that way. I like it that I can mostly feel that nobody I walk past has got a gun. Yes, there might be some exceptions in parts of the UK. And certainly police officers do not routinely carry guns either. We have special firearms police officers. So I like that as a society. So why, I guess the place where I want to start is, why is America so very different? And then the part 2 to that would be, why would anyone want America to be so very different?
Why are we different? One of the questions you sent in our email was the historical justification for citizens owning guns in the US.
Yes, that's kind of where I'm fishing for, yes.
Okay. I could think of 3 things. And again, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm not a professor of history, I do read a lot, and then I care deeply about the subject and freedoms and rights and whatnot. So I'll just kind of share what I think. I could come up with three justifications. One is the Second Amendment and the American Revolution. Two is the racist history of gun control here in the United States, particularly after the Civil War. And the three are the recent Supreme Court decisions, the Heller, McDonald, and Bruen decisions, are kind of the three major points I could come up with of why the U.S. is different. So I did a little bit of research and reading on this, the historical aspect of the Second Amendment, and baked into that is this concept of we value the right to life and liberty, and having a means to protect our family. We are, I think, a culture of self-reliance, and we like to think that we have freedom of choice. I don't know if that's different from, I'm not from England or any other country, so I can only speak to that, but this is what speaks to me about why the U.S. has this concept of the justification for citizens owning guns. Does that answer your question? I'm kind of nervous and rambling.
Yes, it does kind of. I think probably what I would like to understand more, and I don't want it to dominate the entire show by any stretch, but certainly the Constitution seems to be where most people go regarding guns and the right to guns. But what I hear very often in response to that justification is that the modern world is very different. And the world is certainly America. When I say world, let's just assume I mean America. America as a country, as a burgeoning country when the Constitution was written, is a very different place to what it is now. So perhaps the justification for guns and firearms at the point in time that the Constitution was written, that political environment doesn't exist now, and therefore the political justification for writing those words and enshrining gun rights then don't apply now. And maybe that means that there's justification to actually rethink the whole thing completely, specifically gun rights.
Okay. So what, putting my SC hat back on, so what are the things that you think, the couple things that you think would cause for that justification back in 1780s?
I don't think the Wild West moniker exists for no reason at all. Mm-hmm. So in terms of lawfulness as a national thing was much, much harder to maintain. Now, granted, America is many times larger than the UK. So in terms of having a unified set of laws that are enforced by a police force over the entirety of the United States, then it's going to be much more difficult. So I get that. So you had a justification for localized law enforcement and sheriffs in small towns. So people were much more segregated. So the justification for protection. But going beyond that, my understanding is that some of that justification for protection is calling out an organized militia to either act on behalf of the government or to protect from misbehavior by the government, neither of which seems to be something is either likely to happen now or an appropriate thing to call out now.
Okay. Because I kind of see like really two justifications for it. One is at a personal level, my ability to defend my self and my family from criminals, and then two, for the deterrence against tyranny. And so I don't know if we want to go down that path or if you want me to respond to what you just said.
Yeah, if you could do the respond first, then we can move on, and we can drop the historical thing and move on, because really people are mostly interested in the situation now. How the situation was 200 years ago doesn't really apply to how people think now.
Sure. So, we do still kind of have a militia in the way that you described it. We do have selective service, and we have in times of war had drafts where every able-bodied man of a certain age has to register and then show up if selected for service. I think they've expanded that now to women and whatnot. So we do have that, but that's really not here or there. That's really not part of that point.
But, but to answer, just to pick up on that point, though, would those people be expected to provide their own arms, or would the government give them arms?
Well, the government would give them arms, especially in our military today.
Right. So they wouldn't need to have one at home then for that purpose.
Right, but they would also be better off if somebody grew up hunting or shooting or I'm thinking of like a modern country like Switzerland or something, where it's kind of baked into their culture that you're going to have a gun and you're going to be well practiced for it because nobody's invaded Switzerland before. I don't know if I'm. Go ahead.
Well, I am loath to do this because I am not necessarily on the side of the universal right to bear arms. In fact, I've been pretty loudly opposed to the universal right to bear arms. But I do want to stillman something you said a moment ago about tyranny and to draw a bright line between tyranny and Matthew asking if the government would provide those who responded to a call for selective service, would the government provide them arms? Well, the point about defending against tyranny is that we would actually be talking about tyranny in I think in the original sense was more about the internal right to bear arms, right? And so if we have a case in this country where we are turned back to civil war, then yes, the government would provide those on its side the right to bear arms. And the whole point of the Second Amendment and a well-organized militia is the right of U.S. citizens to object to tyranny in this country. And so while the government would provide arms to those that responded to selective service, the right of civilians to own their own arms is to avoid the tyranny I think that Jim was talking about. Jim, does that track pretty well with your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. It was much better said than I said about that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was this concept of a militia. And so when we read the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So my understanding, and again, I'm not a scholar, but that concept of what a regulated militia, regulated meaning well practiced, and then militia meaning every able-bodied man. And so it's not necessarily talking about an organized military. They had organized militaries at the time. Why didn't they put that there instead? Again, I'm not a scholar. I can't really get into the nuances of the language from there. But we have to be careful reading, that 18th century document with our 21st century modern English language. Or American language. Yeah, I can't say any different than what I said, like kind of two reasons. One, the deterrence against criminals, and then two, what Andrew expounded upon about tyranny against governments. Governments have a really bad track record with eventually either subjecting their people or not being able to defend their people. And I can come up with some examples if you're interested in. But
let's pick up on the tyranny thing, because I think tyranny 200 years ago would look very different to what tyranny would now. So what tyranny, so Andrew stillmanned it as internal tyranny, and that's kind of how I read it and understand it as well. So what kind of tyranny today could possibly happen that a gun would protect you from?
So tyranny, again, the criminal side of it, the individual defending my family from crime, I consider that.
I want to get to that. I'm more worried about governmental tyranny.
Okay, so we have this in recent examples. We have governments that pass racist laws and then passing laws to take away the guns of the people. I'm thinking of like the civil rights movements here in the U.S. in the 60s and the 70s, where they intentionally passed laws to take away the guns, and then they passed these racist laws so that people could not lawfully protest or redress their grievances with their government. So there's that.
So how would a gun protect you from that?
Well, if somebody passes a law that says, a certain class of people, or I'm going to take your property without due process. If I have a gun, then I have the ability to say, no, you're not. We're going to sit down and have a discussion about this.
But
I don't
surely
think we do.
they can turn up with a bigger gun or more people with guns. I mean, if you're one man with a gun, AK-47 or M15 or whatever, if you've got 20 police officers looking at you, you might pick off a couple of them, but you're not going to survive that firefight well. So the gun hasn't protected you in that scenario.
Andrew, did you start to say something?
Well, first, I like the way we're approaching this. So I want to, each time we interact, I want to talk about the things we agree on first, and then the thing where we might not agree. So where I agree about gun ownership in the United States, in the way that you have been talking about, the modern gun ownership, there's been some real laws that were passed that were just a little racist, right? But it's pretty clear that black and brown people with guns face a higher risk from law enforcement in society than Caucasians, right? I mean, the numbers, they're actually not even close, right? It's not like first and second place are neck and neck here. Second place is not close. And so black and brown people lose these confrontations even when they are carrying weapons legally. So I agree with that point. The place where I don't think I agree is that we live in a world now where the battlefield is not controlled by rate of fire. It's controlled by command, control, and communications. Mm-hmm. And civilians, look, I can own a big gun. I do own a big gun. I own a World War I era French Mauser. It's an 11 millimeter, right? It's a gun that'll shoot a mile. But no matter how many of those I own, I will never be able to defend against a predator drone, right? And so I don't think that even in a world of asymmetric warfare, even in our best asymmetric warfare scenarios, I don't think that civilians in the United States have a chance against the U.S. military. I'm not saying that invalidates what you're saying is the heart of being able to defend against tyranny. But I think Matthew is right to point out that the foundation of being able to defend against tyranny like for like no longer applies.
Yeah, and, okay. And I think the personal protection thing is a very different conversation and has a very different level of justification. But I think the arguing against the tyranny of government, because you look at the USA now, you've got much more mature democratic system. And if we look at the last couple of years, there are people who say that the Texas abortion ban is a form of governmental tyranny, and guns are not protecting people from that. Their only recourse against that is petition to government and electing officials who will change or reverse or weaken those laws. A couple of years ago, that we had the whole mandated vaccines thing. People thought that was a form of tyranny. And again, guns were no protection against that. The only way to protect against that was your elected officials. So that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. I don't see the governmental tyranny thing doing anything because A, the government's got bigger and badder weapons, and C, your democratic process for electing officials and getting statutes put in is much more mature.
Yeah, I think it certainly is different now. There's a couple different ways we could approach this. One is, so what if a local government or state government fails to provide the security to the citizens? Like they fail to enforce the law, or they either aren't willing or unable to do that. So then the gangs or whatever other organization there would effectively become the government. And so they don't have predator drones, they don't have tanks, but maybe they have guns and other stuff. Well, other law-abiding citizens would have the ability then to help repel that thing. And that does happen. That's one example of it that we're not talking about, the citizens of the United States going toe-to-toe with the federal government. It's also this lack of control that our local governments could have. That I think that's one example of it. And the other thing that I thought of while you were talking about this was, okay, you're right. if we have a tyrannical government that is doing something, at least there's a cost to them trying to subjugate us. We may not win, but there's a cost to them that they're going to do to this. And I think that also helps with that concept, because, if, say, for example, tomorrow we wake up and our federal government goes completely tyrannical and we're going to start doing something. How many people in the military, in the National Guard, in the police, civilian law enforcement world would not follow out those orders? Some of them might, but some of them would not. So there's also I think there's going to be some folks even within the ranks that would say, okay, this is not a lawful order, we can't do this, and that would be part of the firepower against it. Again, it's just that that speaks to that concept that at least there's some kind of resistance there by the people. Does that help? I'm kind of feel like I'm talking in circles here.
No, I don't think you are. It helps me understand. Oh, Matthew, I'm sorry. I'll give the mic back in one paragraph, I promise. It helps me in the sense that I understand more what your concerns are. I agree, actually. Whether we were right or wrong in 2020 during the handover of power after the election, Mark Millett, the head of the JCS, right, Joint Chiefs of Staff, he pulled in his subordinates and said, if the worst comes to pass, right, there will be no launch of weapons without my approval. Nobody else's. This is my approval, right? Now, it was we were not going to shoot nuclear weapons at each other. We all got a lot bound up in the what ifs, right? Handing over the nuclear football on January 20th, right? So we all got a little worried about that. But my point is that I think you're right that there are people of valor in the military and that those loyalties might be divided, right? That's why we ended up with some question about President Trump going to Mar-a-Lago with the ball and us having to have another ball, right? And it's given to Biden and the new codes are transferred and all that sort of thing, right? So there can be divided loyalties. Maybe you've got a point there. But in the case of gang violence, it very much seems to me that Matthew lives in a safer society than you and I do. Because while there may be gang violence in the UK, they don't end up with mass murder whether the local government fails or not. Matthew, you've got or Jim, either one of you, but those are my thoughts.
I think the point that, forgive me if I've misunderstood the context you were talking about, James, but the image that put into my head when you were talking just now, and this is going to give away my age, but I'm old enough to remember the Rodney King incident. This was a situation of a black guy pulled out of his car by multiple white police officers and subjected to an horrific beating. And somebody filmed it on a video camera. Now, if I've understood correctly, what you were saying is that good citizens with guns could have saved Rodney King from that beating. I'm not sure that that's true. Or to bring it much, much more recent, George Floyd. What happened with George Floyd? People crowded around with their mobile phones and filmed it. Did anyone actually pull out a gun and rescue him? If they had pulled out a gun to try to rescue him, what actually would have happened?
Right. I get your point. Yeah. I don't know. I can't speak for those people. I wasn't there in either of those situations.
No, I understand.
I just know if, for me, it's very hard as a third person to get all the facts and make a decision. I mean, we're looking at the advantage of hindsight, the videos and testimonies and all this stuff. It's very easy. So it would really have to be a clear-cut case in order for me to get involved. And even at my own, if let's just say hypothetically it was a clear-cut case, like I have full understanding of what's going on in the situation, and I saw something happened, I would have to get involved some way. I should hope it wouldn't be deadly violence, but if somebody is getting abused, my morals, my ethics, I would need to do what I can to stop it. That's just where I am.
I do, and I'm on the same page of you. And let's say hypothetically, let's create a George Floyd type scenario hypothetically. If I was to witness that sort of thing in the UK, I would feel much more confident stepping in, because I would be very confident that none of the police officers would have a firearm. So I would feel much more confident that I would be able to go in there and be verbally express my opinion, and possibly even try to do something to save his life, because I'll be very confident that I wouldn't end up with a gun in my face and a trigger being pulled. If I was a tourist in the US on the streets and I saw that situation, I would get out of the way, because I would be afraid that if I was to try to get involved, a police officer would pull a gun out, and that would be the end of me, and I have family. So that's the difference in those two scenarios from my perspective. So from my perspective, armed police is a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're taught in our training classes that, the time to fight a cop is not on the side of the road, it's in the courtroom. And thankfully now we have better cameras, better audio devices. We've got body-worn cameras, which are almost always mandatory now. Yeah. So hopefully this gets better, as the need for the accountability that's always happening. Everybody's got a phone that can connect to the internet. So the body-worn cameras now, police are trained to do that. So I understand. I mean, maybe that gets back to what we started with in the conversation about, what's the differences in the cultures. I don't know.
Your point about fighting the police in the courtroom, yes, I get that, and that is appropriate. Unfortunately, what that means is somebody typically has to die first before you get that opportunity. But what I'm not hearing in that is a gun helps fight that tyranny in any scenario. And I'm not sure how it does. From my perspective, a gun helps reinforce the tyranny, because somebody with governmental authority has a gun and then nobody wants to step in. So that's the way I interpret it. So I don't see guns as being a useful tool in that localized scenario to fight tyranny. Andrew.
Matthew, don't let me forget to ask a question about 3%. And Jim, I was do you have Gander Mountain in the part of the U.S. that you're in there? Well, I think they're closed now, but you're familiar with Gander Mountain. Yep. Okay, good. Ours, I don't know if all Gander Mountains are closed, but ours, where I am, is closed. So I was in Gander Mountain. This is right after my daughter was born. And I do not carry these days. But we were, the gun conversation is just an easy one to have in the United States, right? I mean, you just talk to anybody about guns, and mostly it's okay, right? Because most people aren't crazy, even if they're concealing, so it's fine. And I asked the manager at Gander Mountain. I don't remember how the conversation started, but I asked him. It was right after one of those big mass shootings, and I don't even remember which one. It might have been Las Vegas. Forgive me for not remembering those details, but I asked him if he was carrying, and he said no, that he didn't own a weapon, but he was thinking about buying one. And I asked him what he would do if someone in body armor. Now, the Las Vegas shooter was not in body armor; he was up in a hotel room, so not trying to confuse those details. But if somebody comes in body armor in Gander Mountain and he's got a gun, is he going to engage the shooter? And he said yes. And I said, would you engage the shooter even if I'm standing by you? And he said, well, I think I'd have to. And this goes to Matthew's point. I actually think that the intent of a well-armed militia and the idea of our right to bear arms is somewhat sacrificed on the altar of people that carry guns and they don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So why don't I carry a concealed weapon? Because my daughter is usually with me. And if I engage in an active shooter confrontation, and that person is either better armed or better armored than I am, or if I'm just a particularly bad shot, I suddenly become the target of someone who is obviously more fanatical than I am because I don't shoot up malls or whatever, right? But there's a real issue with everyone being able to carry a gun. Now, by the way, this is in my mind. I'm not trying to saddle you with my baggage, but there's a real issue in my mind between the right to bear arms and the sensibility of bearing arms. So that's the first problem that I see. And the second problem, the 3% bit, something like less than 3% of violent crimes committed in the United States are prevented by a citizen with a gun. And I'll be happy if you guys would like. I'll see if I can share that source before we get off mic, because I don't want to make some kind of crazy claim and make it impossible for you to.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that. I wasn't aware of that number. It would definitely be a question I would love to ask. So if I can check the show notes, listeners, if we've managed to find a source for that, it'll be in the show notes.
So just for this conversation, just take it. Let's just pretend that maybe it's true. It doesn't have to be granted for the conversation. Let's just take it as a possibility. Okay, so my problem is that we are in a country with 390 million-ish guns for 330 million people. So my question is, how many guns does it take in the hands of private citizens to move that 3% to something more than 50%, something more than 20%, right? My point is, and this is my last sentence, it doesn't seem to me that gun ownership is actually the thing that's going to prevent our violent crime problem.
Okay. A lot in there. Okay, so
yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. That was a monologue, and it's sort of unfair for you to have to respond to the whole thing. So I apologize.
That's all right. I'll try to do my best. Regarding the study, I think I stumbled across that too, preparing for this discussion, and I think the number was somewhere around 30,000 a year, maybe 20,000 a year of crimes were stopped. Yeah, it's somewhere around there is what I read. I think that number is vastly underrated. I think it's probably north of 1 million. So when a private citizen, a non-law, when I say LEO, I mean law enforcement officer. So those are sworn officers. So a non-LEO citizen uses a gun self-defense. The local police agencies are not required to report that to the FBI. In addition to that, many people are reluctant to report it. So let's just say I'm out at night trying to get into my car. Somebody comes up with a knife or some kind of aggressive manner. If I just brandish my firearm and then they're like, okay, I'm out of here, see ya. Is that stopping a violent crime? The crime hasn't happened yet, but it was on its way to happening. I think a whole lot more of those kinds of things happen in the United States than reported. Your last point of that was, how many guns does it take to raise the number of lawful to make society safer? Is that what you said?
Words to that effect. By the way, that still only gets you to 33%. And so I would still have the same question. Let's say you're right. Let's say that it's 1 million versus 3,000 or even 30,000. Actually, I used 30,000. My apologies. Let's say it's 1 million versus 30,000. We get to this sort of 33%. How many I guess the other question is, how many violent crimes do we have in the United States? So let's say that 1 million of them get solved by guns in the hands of private citizens, non-law enforcement officers. Okay. How many violent crimes do we have? And how many more guns do we have to prevent a substantial portion of the rest of those violent crimes? And against that backdrop, what does the UK have as a, for instance, in violent crimes? And, how do those stack up, right? What are we looking at? If we got rid of guns, what would our violent crime ratio look like? If you see what I mean. So there's some comparisons on both sides to be done.
I don't think it's a numbers game. To me, it's a philosophical kind of question about, like, I have a right to exist. I have this right to life and liberty, and somebody trying to take that from me without due process, whether it's the government or criminal or would-be criminal, I should have a right to defend myself. I don't care if I'm the only defensive use of firearm that year. I should do that. I don't think we can come up with these sorts of policies based on statistics. I work, I mentioned in the preamble before the podcast, I work for a government agency, and I help prepare some of the numbers that get reported to the state and federal agencies on this. And those numbers are, that data is undercounted, miscounted, or changed intentionally for political purposes. It's not consistently counted. And like I mentioned earlier about the whole defensive use of firearms is being underreported as well. So none of that matters to me. It really doesn't. I think I understand your point. Like, it seems like I should hope that I would be more safe if the numbers were in my favor. I don't care. I should have the right to defend myself, my property, my family, regardless of what the other numbers do. Like, I should not be penalized for a criminal choosing to try to violate my right to exist. Does that help?
Halfway.
Yes.
Halfway.
Okay.
And I'm on board with that. Absolutely. Yeah. We've had cases in the UK where a home intruder has ended up being killed by the homeowner, and as far as I'm aware, none of those scenarios have resulted in the homeowner going to jail. And in none of those scenarios, a gun was used by anybody. So
that was what I wanted to draw out too, Matthews. By the way, if we were together in public and someone was threatening you, I would defend you too, right?
Thank you. I would run away, but thank you.
I support and defend your right to defend yourself. That is not just a U.S. value. Hopefully, well, I realize it's not a worldwide value. I realize it's not a universal value. But if I could give a gift to the world, that would be one of them, right? That we all have the right to live and exist in as free a state as we can work out with each other. I completely agree. I'll just say again that I think that Matthew lives in a society where he doesn't seem to have less freedom than I do. Just because you can't own a gun, I don't think that means that you're less free, and it does appear to mean that you're more safe.
Okay, so two things. I want to go back real quick to what you said, that you don't carry in public because you're usually with your daughter, and you worry about crossfire or whatever. So one of the things I learned in one of my classes was just because you carry doesn't mean you have to draw. Just because you draw doesn't mean you have to shoot.
Absolutely. Yes.
So you have that option to not do those things, and then you still, under some other circumstance, I'd rather have it and not need it, is the other catchphrase a lot of people use.
Better to be tried by 12 than carried by 6.
Oh. Don't know about that. But again, you seem to be to try to argue the statistics of, like, okay, it seems like Matthew in the UK is more safe because with fewer or almost no gun violence, he doesn't have to worry about being in public. He might get stabbed, robbed, or something else. Those numbers, as I said, I work for a government agency that helps compile these numbers. The numbers, at least here in the U.S., are very not apples to apples, even within different agencies. So it's very hard to argue that from a side of statistics, and that's why I keep going back to, I really don't care about the statistics. What I care about is, I have a right to life, and I have a right to defend that, whether or not, I appreciate what you said about, I'll defend your right to do what you want. I just may not agree with you. That's good.
So I do. I really do support that.
Yeah.
But here's why I care about the numbers. I think you're right. I think you put your finger on at least part of the difference, right? Is that I am interested to some extent in the numbers game. So I'll cop to that. Right? Okay. So, but the reason I care about the statistics is because if we, if the number of incidents of gun violence goes, I don't know what the numbers are. I'm going to use some completely fabricated numbers. Okay. So if it goes from 100 in a million to 1 in a million, I am substantially safer. And so I think for me, the statistics matter because the statistics reflect the actual danger that I am in. So what does that do? That allows me to establish a baseline probability that I can depend on, right? There's something called the base rate fallacy in statistics. And what is the base rate fallacy? That is over-identifying or under-identifying some aspect of what you're trying to calculate, right? The base rate fallacy. How often does something occur or not occur? Well, the numbers matter because if I don't just acknowledge the numbers, I may very well be guilty of some kind of base rate fallacy, which requires me, which puts me in an emotional circumstance that is not justified by the actual occurrence of the thing that I'm concerned about. So yeah, I do care about the stats.
Okay, I see your point. I still think the numbers are in our favor, the gun rights side. I did a little bit of dabbling with searching for statistics about, comparing UK and US crime, and I don't know enough about UK or how those numbers are compiled to really compare that. I mean, I'll take an even better example is like even here within the US, I follow my local police blotter, and there usually is maybe 1 or 2 violent crimes a month in the town I live in. I could go down, drive 45 minutes, an hour to a major city that's really well known for its violence, and they'll get 2 or 3 a day there. So maybe that would be a better example of how we comparing numbers and like it's going to be human nature until we figure out this utopian society and everybody's happy and fed and has everything that they want, Star Trek or something. We're gonna have, it's been there in all of human civilization. We've had tyrannical governments. We've had people wanting to take other people's property and lives and cows and whatnot.
Sure.
So I don't think it's realistic to say that the numbers could ever reach that point. I disagree that the numbers are there for the gun control side. I'm not smart enough to really get into that, so I'm not gonna stake my claim too much on that. But I'm not feeling it, and I'm hoping that's not just because of a bias I'm having. It's because I really have looked at it and I'm not seeing it.
Can I just check, James? Are you okay me asking you a few personal questions about your experiences on that? Because I think that's probably because you have said you feel a need for protection, and that's your justification. So if I can, so when you go to the unnamed large city that's near you, which has got a couple of violent, presumably you carry when you visit.
I don't go in that city, so I avoid it.
You just don't. So your behaviour is that you're nervous enough of the city that what you want, you would rather go somewhere else first than choose to go to the city. And that's with or without a gun. You wouldn't even go there with a gun to help to feel safer. That's right. Okay. I get that. Okay, I'm not quite sure what I was expecting, but what was things. But I mean, it's a cheap shot, so please forgive me. But that's a clear example of behaviour is what's making you safe, rather than the gun is what's making you safe. But to make it more personal, have you ever had to use your gun either visibly or otherwise to ensure your protection?
I've had crazy people banging on my front door a couple times in the middle of the night. And so I didn't show them the gun. I had it with me, and I was able and willing to use it. Luckily, they were able to be verbally deterred and left and bothered somebody else. Other than that,
I'm sorry, that sounds deeply unpleasant. I would not enjoy that.
Yeah, I was out in rural part of the country. It wasn't in downtown or anything. Other than that, I've had a couple of things where, okay, so this is something else that we're taught in our classes is the deterrence and avoidance. And so if you see somebody, you're walking on the sidewalk, you see somebody down the street acting a little crazy, cross the road, get out of their way, turn around, go somewhere else. It is much better. The best gunfight to get into is the one you're never in. So that is what I try to do. Situational awareness, whether or not you're carrying a gun or not, just to be aware of who you are, what's going on. Can't think of any other examples right now.
And just to put things into context, I'm also very conscious of home security at night. I have a camera outside my front door so that I can see what's going on. So if anything happened, I've got stuff on camera. I'm aware of where the heavy objects are in the house. I'm aware of where the sharp objects are in the house. So I know where I would go and how I would get there if there was something. So it's not quite gun, but it's very close. Now, if I had access to a gun, that will be somewhere where I could get to it first. So I'm very much aware of how you're thinking and home security and all that. So I'm very much with you on that point. The fact that nobody has broken in is irrelevant. I want the opportunity to be able to protect myself before anything bad happened. Yeah,
and then in some fights, having a knife is better than having a gun. If somebody can cross 10 feet in a matter of a blink of an eye, having a knife is much better. But awareness and not letting that person that close to you is infinitely better. I'm kind of curious, where were you going with that logic, the train of thought there?
In terms of the question I was asking, I just wanted to grab a picture because you were talking about safety and feeling safety. So the kind of place I was going to go was generally how safe do you feel when going out? Because the kind of picture I'm trying to paint is what kind of world are you living in that makes you feel that a gun is useful, that having a gun in your pocket makes you feel X amount more safe than not having the gun? Are there places where you would go where you pack your pockets when you get out your car just to make sure that your gun is there, kind of scenario? And if you find that you don't have your gun there, does that change your behavior? That's kind of the picture I'm trying to paint so that I can get an idea of what the level of fear is in terms of general background living existence and how much a gun actually offsets that in day-to-day life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So violence can and does happen anywhere, in all parts of the United States, all parts of the world. We learned that in recent news headline stuff around the world. And I can give examples, but I don't think I need to say that. No. And violence even happens here in my little hometown, USA, that is fairly safe. But, it's not just the criminal felony violence of somebody having a knife or somebody else with a gun. It's also, robbing somebody, depriving somebody of their property. Maybe, trying to assault me or my wife. Those are all good reasons to also be able to defend yourself. And I'll just say it again, being able to defend yourself is with a firearm is different than not different. Lost my train of thought. So can you repeat your question again? I'm sorry, I got
it was
off
about
track there.
The level of background fear.
Fear. Okay. So that's the other thing is that it's not a fear. Like I don't carry a firearm because I'm fear for my life. I want to be able to have that ultimate level of decision whether or not I submit to somebody else's will. if somebody wants to violate me or my wife, I at least have a say in the matter if I have a firearm with me. Otherwise, if somebody else doesn't, or if I don't and somebody else wants to, I'm not that strong of a guy. I haven't had any formal martial arts training. I'm not sure I could defend my wife against more than a couple people on my own. So that's the kind of logic behind that. I think your question is like, how do I feel emotionally? Like, do I feel like it's a dangerous world out there and I need to do this? Yeah, I do think it's a dangerous world. Whether or not that's in downtown Chicago, which I wouldn't go to, or my little country town, is less likely chance to get involved with that. But it still happens. You still deal with crazy people. We don't know. If somebody's having a bad moment with maybe like a drug addiction issue or mental health issue, all that stuff that can happen anywhere, especially now. Like in the U.S., we have a really bad problems with drugs. All corners cover that. So I just like to be able to have that. I wouldn't call it fear. I think a better description of it is I want to be able to have at least a say in the matter if somebody wants to commit violence against me. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And so just to sharpen up my thinking, my understanding there then. So in terms of the options that you would have to protect yourself should incident X happen, a gun is your maximum level of protection. And since you have the ability to have one, you may as well go max level.
Sort of. So we also learned in our training that you can only escalate violence to one degree. So if somebody comes at you with a fist, I can pull out my pepper spray and spray them. They pull out a knife, something with deadly force. Now I'm allowed to use deadly force against them. So you can't, somebody pushes you angrily in the grocery store. You can't take out your gun and start shooting them. Yeah. You have to, you like I said, you try to be a good
response.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. That's the word, personal response. Yeah, you try to be a really good YouTube channel. Is the Active Self-Protection, teaches a lot of this stuff. And one of his key phrases I love is, you be in public, you be a good, safe, sane, sober, moral person. And then you try to, if somebody brushes up against you, you say, oh, I'm sorry, my bad. If you're at a bar and some drunk person starts getting angry with you, you let them know, hey, I'm not here to fight. Hey, let me buy you a drink. How you doing? Like, you try to do whatever you can to peacefully get out of that situation before it escalates. Now, and sometimes you don't have the option. Sometimes somebody's just out there looking for the fight. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I've been to clubs where those people have been there, and it's not pleasant. I agree, and I get that, and I understand it. My concern over that is, from my perspective, coming from a society where guns literally are not a feature, is if I was to go to America and the kind of things you were talking about happening, I would be more afraid that they had a gun. And so I get it's different. I'm not living there. I'm not growing up there, etc. But that's how I would feel. So I visited America a couple of times, and it changes how I behave, because I'm always worried that I might be talking to somebody who has a gun. Whereas in the UK, I never have that fear. And that the two differences with me as a gunless Englishman change how I behave. And I'll probably go as far as say as it dampers my enjoyment of social interaction.
It seems to me that there's a pretty easy thought experiment here. I was just running it through in my head. So, James, let me just say that I completely trust you as a gun owner. Okay, so you've got some training. I suspect that you go to the range, so you're probably a reasonable shot. You seem like a person that's well balanced. I don't think you're going to pull out a gun and well, we used to say go postal, but unfortunately,
I know what that means. What that means.
So, yeah, I'm not.
Link
I'm
in
not
the
a
show
bad,
notes if you don't.
I'm not a bad shot, but my wife is a better shot, so that's what keeps me on the straight.
That sounds like a scary situation. That does.
So here's the thought experiment for the three of us. We're all walking down the street together. And Jim, you've got your firearm. So somebody comes up and they are intent on harming the three of us, right? So what world would I rather live in? The world where the criminal doesn't have access to firearms, or the world where you have a firearm where you can defend the three of us? For me, that's an easy call.
Sure, but what if you live in that world with no firearms and then the criminal has a long pointy knife and is stronger and bigger and is faster than you? What do you do then?
Well, I don't think that's particularly instructive in the world of firearms. So presumably in the world where we only have knives, we can all carry knives.
Yeah, but if the police found you with a knife, they would have nasty things to say. We haven't necessarily got free carry of knives in the UK.
Right. Oh, right. So I'm only speaking of the US. In this case.
If I was to have a penknife in my car and I had a traffic accident and there was risk of road rage and the police turned up and they found my penknife in the car, they would ask me some very serious questions about my intent with having a penknife. And if I was to say it's for self-defense, that could be taken as motive and predetermination.
So, Andrew, can I push back on that a little bit?
Sure. And now my American liberty's kicking in. I carry a pocket knife. I don't know what's going on with you crazy people in the UK. Yeah, Jim, please push back. I mean, that's what this is about, right? Because So please ask me the hard questions, because you're sort of being asked the hard questions. So yeah.
Well, I mean, okay. So say we lived in a world where there wasn't any guns, but we still had strong men with pointy knives. That's great. If you and I, Matthew looks pretty able-bodied, we could at least train with a knife. But what about your frail old grandmother? Does she then have not the ability to wield a knife in the way that one of the three of us could? That's why they say that the firearm is a great equalizer. It makes it doesn't win the battle, but it levels the playing field between the most frail person to be able to defend themselves against the strongest person.
So that, look, I agree that my frail grandmother, she's really frail now because she's dust. But I agree that the edge cases are the hard cases. And my frail grandmother, if she really is frail, probably does not have the capacity to outdraw someone that has a gun. So I don't think that edge case actually helps gun ownership at all. In fact, my mother owns a gun, and she's even someone who intends to do her harm and they don't have a gun. She is not able-bodied enough to use that firearm to protect herself. So I actually disagree with the foundation of the question, because there is a type of frailty that I think is being appealed to, not by you, but by that particular setup that I've heard before. I think there's an appeal to frailty, and then it gets switched in the middle to say, oh yeah, this frail person actually has the capacity to use this gun on this other person who already has a gun or a knife. And so I don't think that setup actually works in the way that people think it does.
I understand the scenario, and yes, in that scenario, I'd rather be the man with the gun. Straight up, I don't live in a country where that would be possible, but that is the truth of the matter. So I would have to come up with some really good talking skills. If it was me in that scenario and I had a jacket, I would use the jacket as a distraction. I would take the jacket off and I would use it as some method of distraction to get between the blade and myself, but I would certainly try to talk the situation down. If it was a gun and not a knife, my jacket wouldn't help, but I would still have the only option of trying to talk the situation down. But yes, in either of those scenarios, it would be much easier to have a gun. my concern about that kind of scenario where one person has a gun is when tensions have gone like that, it usually means somebody dies, whereas any other methodology, it's, or either knives can be pretty nasty. Would I rather have several knife wounds or a single bullet wound? I don't know. It's a scenario I'd rather not be in either way, to be frank. I think what concerns me most about the gun culture in America, is slightly moving the conversation on, is Andrew's already referenced it. James, you are clearly a very responsible gun owner, and you're clearly not alone. There are clearly a great many responsible gun owners in the US who clearly take their own gun ownership very seriously, take training very seriously, take mentality very seriously, and probably redo their training on a regular basis. Wonderful. I think that's great. My concern is, my understanding is that it's all too easy to have a gun, to open carry, or even hidden carry, concealed carry, sorry, let's use the correct terminology, and not make any effort to go through any of that training. And I think that's what bothered me. I don't so much as fear the responsible gun owner like yourself. You probably wouldn't scare me in the bar with a gun, whether I could see it or not, now that I had a chat with you. But it's the drunk person who clearly hasn't got that kind of responsibility. They would scare me utterly shitless.
Yeah. So is your question is about training, or
it's just a general point,
ease of access, or
not so much okay, well, let's change that into a question. Would, at the very minimum, gun control which mandates responsible ownership and removal of weapons if you do not adhere to the rules of responsible ownership, would that be a better place?
There's a case right now going through the court system regarding the state of New York and this very issue. And so the problem is that the state of New York set a bar so high that many people couldn't achieve it. At one point they had you had to surrender your usernames and passwords to all your social media to the police, and then they would determine whether or not you were a good enough person to own a gun. That's the level of
wow. This is Matthew jumping in on the edit very quickly. There are some links in the show notes about this case in New York, or rather about the legislation in New York, and it does say handing over social media accounts so that the content can be reviewed. I couldn't find any details explicitly saying passwords. That would certainly be something that I would say is a step too far, but certainly reviewing of social media accounts, that's possibly acceptable. I think it helps you to see the kind of person that's applying for a gun license. Anyway, links in the show notes as usual. Feel free to read them.
The control that they tried to exert, and it wasn't to make the world a better place, it was to restrict people from the number of people from carrying in public, or being able to possess at home. That's one problem that we run into when we start talking about, what is a reasonable training requirement or any other requirements. Because getting back to our discussion, beginning of our discussion, like, okay, then how could this be used by a tyrannical government to start to reduce the number of guns so that it would be less of a cost for them to subjugate their people? I'm sorry to go there so quickly. I know that probably sounds a little bit crazy, but this happens. This does happen. We can come up with examples, good winds of law and all. But so what is that reasonable requirement? I think training is a really great idea. I'm not sure that the government can or is able to mandate that without violating rights. And, we have like you said, that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. That would need to be a constitutional amendment to change that wording to say, okay, it can be infringed under these things, blah, blah, blah. So I think reasonable gun ownership is really good. We should use peer pressure. My other friends who are gun owners, we challenge each other with stuff. If somebody's doing something stupid, we let them know and we try to learn from it. I don't know if there's a place where we could have that minimum training or any other restrictive requirements, I guess would be a better word, that the government can impose. Let me just say one more thing about the training. I already mentioned I live in Pennsylvania. The nearby state of Maryland has a training requirement. And I know many people have been through that program. I have not yet. And they're saying that what the state is telling them they have to teach in this class is, one, not very helpful when it comes to it, and then because the training is being done by private corporations, it's not being done by the state. So there are a list of things that you have to do, but it's not really helpful in the grand scheme of helping people, equipping them to be able to carry their firearms safely in public. So I worry about that. Like, can it be adequate? I don't think it can. I'm willing to be changed on that, but I'm having trouble getting there, especially with the recent cases where the courts are striking down. We can't allow a government to set too high of a bar for an enumerated right. I mean, what if they did that for the First Amendment and you weren't allowed to post online unless you had at least an 8th grade grammar, which I think would be a fantastic law.
What's the number one killer of children and teens in the United Kingdom?
Oh, we're going there now, are we?
Well, I think it's yes, we are. Okay. What's the number one killer? I don't even know if you looked this up. I didn't plan to ask you the question. What's the number one killer of children and teens in the United Kingdom?
I don't know. I would probably has the guess at car accidents.
So since late 2019.
Let me see if I can. While you're talking, let me see if I can find the truth.
Yeah. Since late 2019, the number one killer of children and teens up to age 24, if I recall correctly, is gun violence. It has surpassed auto accidents. It's surpassed
here in the U.S., Andrew, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And my problem, only with part of what you said, Jim, is that. I know that you're right in the sense that requiring some level of training appears to be orthogonal to the Second Amendment, right? That it shall not be infringed. But not every law is a good law. And I'm not an originalist. Now, I do agree that we would have to create a constitutional amendment to the Second Amendment to somehow change that wording. Right. So as a principle of constitutional law, you're absolutely right. However, I'm not an originalist, and I would be willing to bet my last Jurassic dollar that if we could raise the fathers of the Constitution and point out to them that we now live in a society where the number one killer of children and teens is gun violence, they would abridge the Second Amendment.
Regarding,
by the way, I can't prove that. Obviously, that's more rhetorical than anything else.
Yeah. So there's two things there. One is the statistic side of it. So the FBI considers everybody, only has the age block of people under 24. So when we say teens, do we say children? Where do we draw that line? We don't have those numbers. Two, how many of those is related to gang violence, drug culture? Like, it's not the gun, it's the behavior of the people, it's the bad culture that's involved with that that's could be affecting these. Also, I think I disagree that I think drugs, particularly now fentanyl, is becoming a huge problem here in the U.S. I would argue that those might even surpass that number. You're probably looking at the numbers now, so I can't.
New England Journal of Medicine this year. Yep.
Okay.
Be happy to have that in the show notes. No, but hey, I'm not trying to say that one bad is worse than the other, right? So
I understand.
I'm not going to dismiss the fentanyl issue. That is, it's catastrophic, and so just yes to all of that, right?
And so the other thing is that if I believe, I think I stumbled across that number a few months ago. It just says deaths due to blank, gun violence, knives, cars, whatever, right? It doesn't say due to being shot by, like suicides are included, that number, lawful police officers having to lawfully do their duty.
I don't think that's. Now, look, I'm not saying you're wrong here, because I actually am not in a place to challenge that too strongly, but I don't think law enforcement shootings are in that number. I could be wrong, and I'm prepared to be wrong on that point. Okay. So.
Sure. That's okay. So that was kind of, I think, your first point about the statistics. Again, getting back to statistics, I don't care. What I care about is, you said, you think that the if we could just present enough evidence to the founding fathers, they would be in favor of changing this. I don't think so, because the whole reason we have that is to have to prevent the tyrannical government and allow people to live their life in their own safety. I don't think that matters when it comes to the mechanism for that. Does that make sense? I'm kind of struggling with words here.
No, it is fine. I think, we continually find in the show the bright lines where we just disagree. And I don't have a problem with that. That's always okay here to just talk through it, find where we disagree. I do think the numbers matter for reasons. I won't go back through the safety issue again, but we do disagree there, because here's the truth. My daughter is safer, substantially safer, if she just lives on the other side of the ocean, right? So you take gun violence out, and all of a sudden, her likelihood of reaching adulthood goes up. And so the numbers matter to me, though I really do understand. And you're going to think I'm a total hypocrite, because I've already told you I'm a gun owner. Right? I've already copped to that. But if I send my daughter to live with Matthew, she immediately avoids one substantial risk to her reaching adulthood.
To answer your question earlier, Andrew, I've got an article. It's 7 years old. I can probably find something more recent if I tried harder. If I did, check the show notes. But a 7-year-old article, 2013, so that's more than 7 years actually. Over 600 teenagers in the UK died in car traffic accidents, and that's around about 50% of the deaths. And on the subject of that, so I was right, it is traffic accidents, but on the subject of that, within the last few weeks, maybe a month ago now, we had a tragic case here in the UK, 4 teenage boys going away on a holiday to Wales, drove from the London area up to Wales, really bad weather. There's an incident that's not been made public yet, but their car was found over a bridge upside down in the river, and all 4 of them died. And it made national news, because that kind of thing is so rare in the UK. That kind of incident becomes a national tragedy. We just don't have teenagers dying in that kind of number in a single incident.
Yeah. Now, Jim, I can sort of see inside your head in the sense that you're probably saying, right, the UK is a lot smaller than the US too.
So a lot smaller population, 10th of the size or thereabouts. Or was it 20th of the size? In your head. Yeah, but no, 5th of the size, I think we decided, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right. So you might be saying, if the UK was the size of the US, maybe they would need different ability to defend themselves. Maybe the cause of death among kids would be different. So if you're thinking those kinds of things, I yield that point. But on one more issue, and then you can have the floor, because I'm about to be at risk of repeating myself. You said, and I completely believe you, that our numbers of reporting gun violence and how it's reported and all of that sort of thing, that stuff is maybe manipulated behind the scenes. Oh, well, actually, you've said it's manipulated, and I'll just take as offered that that's the case. But then surely what we need is whistleblowing on that number manipulation. Because if the number manipulation is substantial as you say that it is, that actually guns are protecting us, and that the Second Amendment is the thing that is keeping the United States from tyranny, and that it is private gun ownership that is keeping our children from dying in larger numbers in the street. If gun ownership numbers actually bear that out, and those numbers are being manipulated to keep the population in the dark, then somebody needs to blow the whistle on that. It shouldn't be done here on Still Unbelievable. that needs to be some sort of congressional inquiry, and somebody needs to blow the whistle. It's really that easy in my mind.
Okay.
I think you mentioned about statistics, and I'm on the same side. I think the statistics are important, and the reason why I think they are important is when all we go on is our own personal experience and our own personal scenario, we can have a couple of incidences which affect us directly, which are disproportionate to the bigger picture. And yes, we could have, or even me, make it about me in the little town that I live in by the seaside here in the UK. There is a drug issue in the UK. It's one of the poorest towns in this area of the UK. So there is a deprivation issue, and deprivation goes with drugs, and it also goes with lower quality education, and it also goes with reduction of post-schooling education, so post-compulsory education, which goes with lower paid jobs. So there's this whole cycle of stuff, and it can create an area which is prone to certain types of violence. So in the particular area of the UK that I live in, if I was allowed a gun, I might very seriously consider it because of where I live. But if I look at the national picture of violence, it's actually really quite low, and I don't really need to worry that much. Certainly where I go to work, I drive 40 minutes to work in the big city, and I'm a lot safer there. But housing is also more expensive there. Therefore, it's safer because richer people, etc. So I think sometimes seeing the bigger picture helps us to see outside of our bubble. So that's where I think statistics go. Now, we've managed to avoid it this far, but please do forgive me bringing it up. But we have a listener demographic who won't forgive me for not bringing it up. So I am going to bring up mass shootings, and I'm going to bring up the issue of the number of students dead in schools, because that is all the news we see in Europe. You know, another mass shooting at a school in the US. Somebody walked in, they stole their parents' gun. They don't have the right to own a gun. They've got poor mental health, and they've gone and they've killed a dozen students. It's horrific and it's terrible. But that is the image that we see in Europe of what guns in America mean. So I think we have to address that.
Okay.
And if removing guns from a significant proportion of the population reduces those deaths, surely it's worth feeling a little bit less safe in your own personal bubble for the bigger picture of many more children get to hug their parents goodnight.
Okay. So you've laid out there a few things. I caught mental health issues. I caught parents not securing their firearms from children. You said a couple other things. I'm sorry, I wasn't taking notes well enough. But
that's fine.
Just deal with those issues. Like, okay, that is a huge problem. Obviously, somebody who wants to go take a bunch of other people's lives has mental health issues. Otherwise, healthy people don't wake up and say they're going to do this today. So that's a big problem here in the U.S. I can probably time for another podcast about the reason for that. The pharmaceutical companies, the lobbies, huge problem. So, you know, a lot of it can get can go down the slippery slope of, you know, I'm not feeling well. I'm kind of hitting my life. I need to get angry. I'm not getting the help I need, either health or psychotic drugs. The medication I need to get well. People aren't getting that. And I think there's a lot of problems for that. This is something, if I can plug my podcast again, so this is something that we want to talk about living intentionally, leaning forward into life, not just letting it happen to you, but if it seems something's off in your life, you need to take ownership of that and make it better. You need to sit down with somebody, sometimes just talking to a friend, something like people are given this. I think a lot of victim mentality is being talked about, and people aren't going out and have the tools to sit there and look at their own life and say, what is it I need to make better about things? Our media, social media, TVs, everything is just filled with, you need this or you need that. It's all driven by advertisement, so that's understandable. So that's a huge problem, and I can't, use that as one of the pillars to hold up your argument that, these school shootings could be reduced if we didn't have that. So if I take that one away, because second one is, the poor parenting, whether or not you're leaving your firearms where somebody who shouldn't have access to them gets it. That's another big problem. I think that's more of a cultural problem where parents aren't being involved in their kids' life. They're not asking them how school went. They're not getting them to the help they need if teens do need help. Mm-hmm. So I think that's another huge cultural problem that is beyond the mass shootings in these schools. We've got these other fundamental. I think one of your questions that you sent to me was about what are the failings in society that lead people to need guns, and I think that's a huge problem. Lacking quality education, and then I'm dancing around the point that you tried to make about, surely my own self-protection, feeling of self-protection is not worth a school kid's life. And I think that's a bit of a straw man. My personal rights, my ability to live, and my ability to do that through firearm ownership or anything else should not be affected because somebody else wants to make a poor choice. Somebody else wants to commit crime. That's I want to keep trying to bring it back to, it's not the gun, it's this behavior, it's all this other stuff surrounding that. And so another thing about the school shootings is that they're they are always in gun-free zones. And so it's already illegal. Sorry, Andrew?
Hold on. Say that last thing again, that gun shootings are always...
School shootings.
Sorry, I say gun shootings. My apologies. School shootings are always
in gun-free zones because by federal law, all schools within 1,000 feet are gun-free zones, and that's up to debate whether or not that should be. But now teachers can't defend themselves. Many school districts here in the U.S., they have police officers that are unarmed. This happens in several other places. We've got some other high-profile recent shootings, I think, over the past year where it was clearly mishandled by the responding police officers.
I'm thinking about Uvalde.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Just wanting to get on the same wavelength, please. Yeah.
Well, I'm trying not to bring out specific examples because it's really easy then to pick apart and say, this, and if the person didn't have the gun, then this wouldn't have happened. And the door was left open. What if they walked in there with 2 machetes? Maybe they wouldn't have killed as many people, but still people would have been attacked. That does happen in not just the United States, but around the world. So I kind of don't like the question. I've raised a couple issues there about the mental health, the better culture, responsible parenting, the right of self-defense of everybody, including teachers and school administrators. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'm broadly on board with the answers you've given. Yes, if mental health was appropriately looked after, fewer people would have issues which drive them to a point. But then again, the way our global and international society is, every one of us are literally a couple of paychecks away from sheer destitution and desperation, and that immediately brings you into a mental health crisis. So it's all well and good talking that around, but people can very quickly go from stable and healthy to destitute, poor, and mentally wretched, to a point where they could be driven to something like that. And if the access is available to do something dramatic that gets them on the news, that makes them have their own Wikipedia page dedicated to their name, then that's often the option that they will choose. Now, I may be separate from the United States, but I am familiar with the phrase suicide by police. Make a big name of yourself, go out in a blaze of glory, and that only exists because of easy access to guns. Yes, mental health is a feature, etc., but those people with poor mental health wouldn't do that kind of thing if there wasn't easy access to guns, which goes back to the earlier question earlier, better responsibility around guns. Now, to just tangent very slightly, I'm assuming it's the same in the United States, so I need to rely on you guys to confirm. But here in the UK, my car license can be taken away if I have epilepsy. My car license can be taken away if I'm caught drink driving. If I'm caught in a bad enough way drink driving, my car can be removed from me and crushed. I know somebody personally who has had that happen to them. So these kinds of things the state can do, and we accept it as part of the rules of society, that you behave badly with a car, then your right to have a car is taken away. Is it really that hard to do the same with guns?
So depends on what you're talking about. So right now there's a discussion or argument going on about the so-called red flag laws. So if somebody seems to be, they call it extreme protective orders. If somebody can petition the government, the local governments, excuse me, let me try that again. Somebody can petition the local police department and say, I think my neighbor is crazy. I saw him in doing something that is clearly not safe, and here's why. In some jurisdictions, they can come and take away the guns temporarily. Sometimes that does not end well for either the police or the person doing that. So that gets into kind of a legal discussion of, our Constitution says you can only have your rights taken away through due process. And whether or not that's a violation of that, I don't know. But that's kind of one thing. The other thing is, so legally, that I believe it was the Gun Control Act of '86 here that Ronald Reagan signed, creates a class of people called prohibited persons. And so for whatever reason, you could be on this list, ex-felons, if you have a protective order against you, like a spousal abuse kind of thing. Right. There's a bunch of things that can get you on that list. And once you're a prohibited person, whether or not so once you're on that list and then you try to buy a firearm, they check your name on that list, and then they say you're no good. But if you're already on that list and you own a firearm, you're also committing a federal felony at that point. And so the legal framework of should this person have a gun, and then actually the cops showing up to take the guns from them, I think are two parts to that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm more interested in how that process would work and whether there is actually the appetite, because from what I've seen and read, there are some parts of the US where even the appetite to do that seems to be reluctant, which strikes me as being very odd. Surely you don't want people who are very likely to just create a nuisance with a gun, no matter what that nuisance means. Surely you don't want those people with a gun, regardless of how free your society is with regarding gun ownership.
Well, kind of gets back to our discussion about training, like who gets to decide what somebody is not safe anymore. Is it they had, one DUI, they've had 3 DUIs. For the record, I believe the law is 3 within the past 2 years puts you on that list, which seems like a lot.
By state and jurisdiction.
Okay.
Not positive, but I'm pretty sure it does.
Yeah. The last time I purchased it, that was one of the questions on the form 4070, whatever that is, and that was one of the questions was, are you a drunkard? It's like, not every day.
Not at this moment.
And so it calls me to ask the person, it's like, what do you mean? Like, do I drink alcohol? Yes. Do I do it every day? No. Like, and then so that's what he explained. Like it's 3 DUIs, convictions of DUIs within the past 2 years, and then there's a bunch of other stuff on that list. Have you ever renounced U.S. citizenship?
So I need to just rewind on that.
Yeah.
3 DUIs in 2 years.
Yeah.
In the UK, one DUI gets you your license removed for a number of years. You would never get 3 in 2 years because you'd still be serving the first one.
Yeah, and that's on my list of things here about what's wrong with our society that people need guns. Is we have a broken justice system. It's not fair for all. Things like that. You know, if you're rich enough, you can get away with pretty much anything. Anyway, that's a side
You don't
question.
get the justice you deserve. You get the justice you can afford.
Forward, right?
Yeah. But surely, just for a moment, if you don't mind, guys, it seems to me that what happens in this gun control debate is an equivocation where we wouldn't equivocate in any other circumstance. So we can agree about DUIs, right? And we all have sort of come to a place where we're saying, well, yeah, if somebody's doing bad with a car, we need to stop them from driving the car. But whenever we focus this back on gun control, it's like, well, I don't know, we have this constitutional right to have guns. Well, if the constitutional right was, okay, fine, you have an unabridgable right to own a vehicle, we wouldn't be saying that shouldn't be abridged. We would be saying clearly that's problematic, and I think that it's it's this pretty clear case in my view. I realize I might be in the minority here, but it seems to me that it's a very clear case where in other circumstances we wouldn't make the same kinds of rationalizations, and so I might say, okay, fine, lots of people own guns now. Mm-hmm. What is stopping me from owning a hand grenade? Because that's a better equalizer.
Bazooka, go big, bazooka.
Tank.
Yeah. Well, and so now look, I know that this can get hyperbolic pretty quickly. And I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm not trying to use the absurd in any way. This is not a rhetorical point. I'm not trying to win some sort of podcast victory. but it very much seems to me that the kinds of rationales we use for owning guns are based on the kinds of laws that we wouldn't want to support if we were replacing guns with cars or fentanyl or pick your poison. So I really think that the constitutional argument is pretty weak sauce. Although I've already said I'm not an originalist, right? But I don't despise our Constitution. I don't burn the flag. I am a proud American when there's room for me to be proud. Mm-hmm. But I have a real problem with the arguments for guns because we wouldn't make these arguments anywhere else.
We've been going for a while. There's a couple more points I want to make, but we're probably getting ready to wind up. Thank you for the conversation, James. And I'm going to paint a scenario there. I think it's a plausible scenario. I'll let you guys judge it because I'm not a fan of hypotheticals which will never happen. I think that doesn't serve anything. But I imagine this is a plausible scenario. So I'll be interested to know your guys' opinion because this is my view of America. Let's imagine that somebody gets a drone and adjusts that drone so they can put a weapon on it. And they fly it somewhere and they start firing indiscriminately into a public place. I'm fairly sure that the technology exists that somebody could do that should they choose to do so. I would imagine that the result of that would be more legislation on drones, not more legislation on guns.
I think you're probably right. May not be, but yeah, you could do it today with a quadcopter, a little 25 pistol, and an Arduino board with an actuator.
And you could be half a mile away and they'd never find you.
Yeah.
So, but how does that new law save somebody?
I don't know, because somebody who's determined to do it will find a way to determine to do it. But let's imagine that they then made it mandatory to have registration if you buy a drone, because that's pretty much the case here in the UK. You buy a drone over a certain size, you have to register it, name, address, etc. So the way that would work is if they're able to retrieve the drone, they could then track down who's got it. If they're able to identify what the drone is, they'd at least be able to get a list of who's purchased or who's registered with drones like that. So they'd have a list of people they could do. So that's where I would imagine it will get to. If they were able to capture the drone, they'll then capture the gun. Without a gun register, they wouldn't know who's owns a serial number.
Well, but the answer seems to me to be a little easier than that, right? Because the UK doesn't have a gun epidemic. So however the laws are different, and whatever the manufacturing standards are that allow guns onto the street and that sort of thing. I mean, if you want a specific way where an individual law stops a particular person from getting killed, that might be a longer conversation, because we'd have to chase a lot of sequences of events. But the United Kingdom does not have a gun epidemic. Yeah. And so clearly laws and frameworks and societal standards do make a difference. It's not as if we have laws and therefore we still have anarchy.
I disagree, Andrew. I think we do. There's people who violate the law. They're called criminals, and they want to violate my rights to exist and my property and my wife. And I should have the ability to do the ultimate defense of those values. I wasn't going to bring this up, but you went there.
Wait a minute. Hold on. You're not responding to what I said, though. Just let me point out that I said that there are two different systems of laws, the United States and the United Kingdom. One country has a gun epidemic. The other one doesn't. I pointed out that there are two different systems of laws. And you seem to be appealing to, we have laws, but we still have anarchy, and that's why we need guns. But the very difference between the two setups is the thing that I'm appealing to point out that laws do make differences.
I'm just not there. Help me out here. How can laws prevent somebody from still wanting to commit that violence or do?
Wait, wanting to commit violence and having the capacity to do so with a particular. Are you denying that the UK has less gun violence than we do?
I'm not denying that gun control reduces the number of guns.
Okay, well that's actually my entire point, is that we were talking about a drone, and you said how does making a law against a certain kind of drone, how does that save a life? Well, we were using that in the framework of gun control, right? Where this was an analogy, and so I'm actually sweeping that analogy aside and pointing out that in the world that we live in right now, we have two different systems, one where much more gun violence occurs and one where gun violence doesn't, and that it actually is the system of laws that make that difference.
Okay, so gun violence, again, what about all the other types of violence? Sorry, I don't mean to be pedantic. That's the thing that I struggle with.
I'm not sure why you're switching the subject. Do you grant that that's the case?
Sure. Yeah. Let's just say that. Yep. I mean, gun violence in the UK is not non-existent, but it's near zero.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So now, what about all of the other ways that people get harmed? That's a good question. I will happily have the next podcast when we're on the next issue of epidemic violence, if we can solve this one. Mm-hmm. But here's my question for every listener, not just for you. What is our other epidemic violence that we should be looking at?
Well, since you have mentioned the UK, and there will be people who are aware of this, I've seen it trotted out in these kinds of discussions. In the UK, we do have a rising problem with knife crime, specifically in London. It's been steadily growing over the last 20 years, I think.
It seems that there was a big stabbing on one of the bridges over there not very long ago.
And it is rising. We have to acknowledge that, and we have to accept that. And people are concerned. Police officers are concerned about it. It's become bad enough that for a number of years, police officers go into schools in areas which are susceptible to this kind of thing and have conversations with the students about the dangers of knife crime. I think one of the statistics is if you're a habitual knife carrier as a young teen, your statistic, and this is where statistics do become useful, you're more likely to be injured in a knife fight because you've got a knife. So that is a statistic. And so if you don't have a knife, you're going to want to stay away from a knife fight. Whereas if you have a knife, you're probably more likely to engage. And maybe that's a feature of that. So the police are doing active interaction in schools to try to reduce that. But shops and manufacturers are also making efforts as well. You're getting situations now where some knife makers basically, why would you have a knife? For a kitchen. So we need knives in our kitchens to chop food. It's a standard procedure. And sometimes those knives need to be really sharp. We're seeing changes of designs of knives. We're seeing plastic blades rather than metal blades. We're seeing blades without a tip. So rather than a pointed tip, so you can't actually stab someone with a knife anymore with some knives because they've got a blunted tip. You can only do a slicing action. So these kinds of things, they make life a little bit less dangerous, but we really need to get the whole attitude of knife fights down. But shops in areas like that are making knives harder to access by children. Some shops are locking their knives away. So if you want to buy a knife, you have to get a member of staff to get a knife out from you. So teenagers can't actually freely access a knife from a shelf and either run out the shop with it or buy it themselves. So things are being done to reduce that. But yes, it is a rising problem, and I acknowledge it.
James, I sort of took the knife away from you, so please.
So it's got no tip. You can't do anything with it.
It's this knife-looking thing that has a grill on the top of it. They call it a microphone. I sort of took the mic away from you, and I shouldn't have. I want to hear the thing that you were going to say. You were saying I went there, even if I didn't. You were about to make a point that I feel like is important, and I don't want you not to have the opportunity to.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate that. I mean, I think it just goes to basically repeat what I've already said, and that's, we have people who commit violence without guns all throughout countries where guns are not allowed by civilians. And I was going to pick out a few recent examples in Europe, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. I don't need to iterate this right now. That's what I keep coming back to this issue of I have a right to live. I still need to be able to defend myself against the strong man with a knife. Maybe I need better knife skills myself, or being able to disarm with jackets. I'll look into taking more self-defense courses. I keep meaning to sign up for that. So why I got there was from, we were kind of talking about, if we ban drones, there'd be less predator drone violence. Same thing with guns. And I countries like the UK have limited guns. And so now there are fewer gun crimes. That's for a very specific argument against that gun control. My problem is that doesn't help you in the real world where there's knife violence. There's other types of violence or property theft that you still have to deal with, that me as not being as strong or fast as somebody else could defend to. So anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I'm kind of beating that drum too much in this conversation, but that's what I keep coming back to.
I feel like it's the fear argument every time. Now, and I'm not trying to. I realize that you've said a couple times, your gun ownership is not tied to fear, but it sounds to me like the fear argument. So somebody's got a knife. I'm not fast, so I need a gun. And I guess that's fine as far as it goes. But I think it's really easy to say that what that leads to is just a never-ending arms race. Then you say, okay, well, I'm not fast and I have a gun and I live in a bad part of the city, so now I need a bump stop. And so that guy has a bump stock on his on his AK knockoff. And so now I need something with a higher rate of fire and greater range, right? And so I don't know at what, I realize this can get absurd, but I don't know at what point your argument doesn't lead to a situation that is absurd. And I think Matthew, looking at it from the other side of the Atlantic, thinks that gun violence that is killing our children is already absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Matthew, I pinned words on you.
That's fine. I'm happy to own them. I think the escalation is probably my strongest argument on that. As soon as one person has something bigger, the next person wants something bigger than that. And where do you stop the escalation? And the person with the most money can buy the most number of guns and the biggest guns, and therefore they win. And maybe what we need to do is bring the escalation down, bring the ceiling of maximum escalation down an awful lot. We're recording this at the beginning of December. We're coming up for Christmas party season. I'm going to be out on my work's Christmas party next week. Well, some of us will probably end up in a nightclub at some point after the party. The biggest concern I'll have in that evening is somebody getting drunk and throwing a few fists around. I have zero fear that there'll be a knife involved and absolutely zero fear that there'll be a gun involved. So I'll be quite happy to go out there and I'll have a good time, and I generally won't care, but I'll just be on the lookout for drunk people wandering around and just try not to bump into anyone. And but overall, it'll be a pleasant evening. I think if I was concerned that guns were around, I probably wouldn't go. And I think that's the limit for me. So me being in a society where there are no guns, I think gives me more freedom and more safety. So that will be my strongest level of argument. The last point I want to make in this conversation this evening, James, is you mentioned earlier about tyranny. So we talked about when it was in response to where I was talking about about strengthening of gun legislation. Have legislation in to take guns away from people who don't deserve them is effectively what I said. And my justification for that was fewer guns in the hands of people who don't know how to use them or can't use them or won't or will never use them appropriately means higher number of innocent civilian deaths. And the flip side of that you said is that could also, the same tactic could be used by tyranny. And I accept that and I agree that the same rules and the same legislation will be seen by one set of people as an improvement of society and will be seen as another set of people as tyranny. How does a responsible government communicate effectively to its citizens that they're actually trying to do it for good and not for bad? How do you minimize the distrust? How do you minimize the number of people who see that as a big conspiracy? Is that even possible? And that's just an open question. You don't have to answer it. It's just me asking that generally.
Yeah. Sorry to keep repeating, but I think going back to what in the beginning we were talking about tyranny, like governments have a really bad reputation, a really bad track record in human civilization of eventually abusing their people. That's one of the reasons for the Second Amendment, is to keep that government in check, or at least make it a costly thing for them. So I don't think it's going to be a government solution for this outside of something really extreme, like, North Korea military style government where, everybody's monitored and something like that. The only thing I could see is we start fixing some of these underlying societal problems, which I think is also outside of the ability or will of our government. Getting the mental health thing, maybe that's within their grasp. But, the justice system with bad parents, like you don't need a permit to be a parent. The treatment, just because people commit a crime, maybe they're also having a mental health issue that caused them to want to do that. You think you used that example earlier. Let's get them into the treatment that they need. More of that, making the world safer, what I think would cause people to not want to buy as many guns. I mean, I know right now in the U.S., I don't know what the numbers are, but it's a lot of the people have been buying guns out of fear. Mm-hmm. And not just traditional white Republicans, but a lot of blacks, a lot of LGBTQ people, to defend themselves from other crime and from abuse. Sure. It's a very complicated social economic problem. Fixing that, getting the fear level down, and unfortunately, I think it's kind of baked into our system of like, the reason why the news media puts these sensational articles out there is because they want you to stay tuned for the next advertisement. And so they make it as crazy as possible. Political rhetoric, the otherizing of people in order to prey on identity politics. A lot there needs to change. I think social media is very not healthy with how you can share things. You can say things to people that you wouldn't say to them to their face. That's a complicated problem, and I don't know how to fix it. I mean, those were kind of the underlying issues, I think, of why people think that they need to have guns because they perceive that there's more of a threat to crime. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, James. No, I appreciate all of that. A thought that's just occurred to me is if you've got somebody who's got poor mental health, they're probably already suspicious of everybody's motives. And so if they are judged to have poor mental health and not worthy of a gun, as soon as you try to take the gun away, that's going to go straight into conspiracy and says, see, I told you the government was against me.
Yeah.
And it's just going to refeed a degenerative cycle of distrust. I get that, I understand it. That happens in this country as well with other things. People who are in that state of mind, it's hard to wean them off that. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe change their friends.
I mean, we just need to start being better to each other. Be more gracious, be nicer. I wish the solution was in politics or religion or something else. But or pharmaceuticals, but it's not. There's some very deep underlying currents that I think are tearing at the fabric of our societies, and it starts with me. It starts with me and my community. What can I do? That's one of the reasons for the podcast that my friend and I want to doing is to encourage people to do that, to be part of that community and engage.
Okay.
I want to
thank you for that, James.
Podcast.
Thank you, James. We may not have solved the problem, but we've had a very amenable chat along the way. I think I understand a little bit more. I still want to hear somebody in America say, yes, let's get rid of all the guns. But maybe I'm being a little bit too naive and British. Hey, yeah. And look at that. That's why we're friends, Andrew.
Come and take it.
That was...
Hey, Matthew,
you can't say no to an English accent. Come on, we know you guys.
Before we sign off, because there's something here I know that we all agree. I want to say to any listener that feels triggered, sorry, that it's not my fault.
Weak. That was weak.
Look, if you feel very negatively and very strongly about this podcast, if it's bothering you internally, if you are concerned about self-harm, mm-hmm. or if you are thinking about harming someone else, I beg you.
Yeah.
I beg you right now. You're probably listening to this podcast on a phone. Swap to your phone app and dial 988.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, 988 is the suicide prevention hotline. But they'll if you're considering harming someone else before you harm yourself, I'm sure they'll talk to you. But if you can wait, email us. We'll talk to you. Any one of us. Jim will talk to you. Matthew will talk to you. I will talk to you. You probably want to talk to the other two first. That's fine. But I beg you.
Yeah.
Dial 988.
Yeah, I actually had that in my notes here, Andrew. When we were talking about mental health, I was going to mention that. And then the UK number is 0800 689 5652.
Oh, that's awesome.
Not quite as catchy as 988, but yeah, and I'll leave my contact information with Matthew. If somebody wants to talk with me or tell me how what all I got wrong, contact Matthew at the Reason Press address, and he'll forward it to me. The three of us are community builders. We had this conversation not
to antagonize each other, but to pull apart an incredibly difficult problem in American society. We didn't solve it here. It's above all of our pay grade, but I can tell you this. We're community builders. And if you need a community, reach out. You're valued here regardless of your thoughts on this show. Reach out. Okay, Matthew, I'm done.
Thank you, everybody. You've been listening to Still Unbelievable, and until next time, be reasonable. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.